It's a pleasure to introduce Jenny McReynolds. Jenny is a longtime writer and community college educator, beginning retirement for the second time. Her work has been focused primarily on communication, practicing it, teaching it, modeling it, and refining it for herself whenever possible. Her goal in the next year is to write a book for women her age who are entering the world of retirement and hope to open new doors and reinvent themselves along the way. It's a pleasure to welcome Jenny here to the Love Your Mission Inspiring Women interview series. So Jenny, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of the Love Your Mission Inspiring Women's interview series. Thank you.
Happy to do it. Excited to do it.
Good. Oh, good. So let's get started. So what is something that you're celebrating today?
Well, I'm celebrating partly being on my official third day of retirement, third day of my second retirement. And I'm celebrating right this moment the feeling that I feel more open to possibilities than I felt the first time. The first time I retired, I thought that I had to have a plan. And I mean, I felt like knowing my personality that I needed to have a plan. And I think I had too much of a plan. And so I put a lot of expectations on myself, and it wasn't the best thing. And so I feel pretty different now. And I don't know, it's partly because my partner's retired now, and partly because I have been working from home for 15 months. So it kind of just feels like I'm home, you know, and I've been home for a while. So I'm kind of celebrating feeling a little more relaxed and a little more open to whatever comes next.
That's wonderful. It's for you to say that at the first retirement, you did feel like you had to have this planned, and now the transition from having to be home seems like, okay, this is much better. You've adjusted to being home.
Yeah. So that's part of it. I think, you know, that the first time I retired, which was, I can't even remember what year, like 2015, 16, somewhere in there. I just was all of a sudden home, and I had this whole plan of what I was going to do. And it was, even now when I look back, I think that's so funny that I would have thought that was going to work, you know, that knowing myself and whatever. But and my partner was working, and really I was just kind of befuddled. I was just like, oh my God, this is a really long day to, you know, you know, to do whatever it is that I imagined I was going to do, you know. So every time I got asked to come back to work, which was, I mean, I worked about half of every year for about 4 or 5 years. And I was always kind of relieved, you know, to like, oh, thank God I don't have to be retired anymore, you know.
So you could go back, do some more.
Just to what seemed kind of normal, you know, so.
Good. So just a quick question. So I was 15 when I first started working. How old were you when you first started working?
Oh, you know, I was older. I was probably, it was in when, I think really, honestly, I didn't work until I mean, I had little jobs. My dad was a school teacher, and he used to always teach summer school, and sometimes I would work and help him, but I didn't have an official job really till I was in college. And then, kind of right at the beginning of college. And then, but not very, I mean, it feels like for a really long time, I worked at colleges. Like I went to Sac State, and I started working there, and I worked there forever. And I mean, you know, I was a secretary actually for the Women's Studies program, which was very funny to be the secretary of Women's Studies, because they did not, and this was a long time ago. This was like 1973, something like that. And they would hardly ever ask me to do anything because they didn't want me to feel like I was being oppressed. So I would kind of just have coffee and chat with them, you know. So anyway, but I always worked in a college, and then I started teaching at that college, and you know, so it just feels like I've always been involved in this work in some way, you know.
So take us a little bit deeper into the journey that you have had with
Well,
with your career.
you know, I was a pretty unambitious kid. I was raised in I was born in 1951. So, you know, it was really my mom worked outside. She was a secretary sometimes and stuff, but mostly she was a housewife. And then, you know, I kind of came at this crossroads of the women's movement and that life of being where my mom was. And so, like, she didn't have a professional career or anything like that. And not that I don't know, anyway. But so I started out really not having any idea what I wanted to do exactly. And in fact, I majored, I knew I wanted to write. And sort of, I knew that. And so when I was in college, I started being an English major. And really, it turns out that when you're an English major, you just have to read a lot of literature and write about that. But that was not the kind of writing I wanted to do. So I majored in journalism. But I was I'm really an introvert, and I'm really shy. And oh God, I remember thinking, how am I ever going to do this? You know, so because I required going and being on the student newspaper and all those things, but I did it. And so right when I was going to graduate from college, I applied for a couple newspaper jobs, like up in the foothills and whatnot. And I thought, oh, I don't even know if I really want to do this, you know? So my college roommate at the time was going to grad school at Sac State in communication studies. And I thought, oh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to grad school. I mean, this is my entire decision-making process. So I went to I applied and I got in, and I thought, oh my God, this is great. Now I don't have to make a decision, you know? And really, it turned out that decision, that non-decision, but that action allowed me to teach eventually. I mean, that was how I ever got to be able to teach. But it's always been really interesting to me because, you know, I kind of perseverate over decisions sometimes, and that was the opposite of that. And yet it was probably one of the most powerful things going forward that I did, partly because of the result of it, but partly because it was communication studies, and I started studying interpersonal communication a little bit, and that really resonated with me. And it's just been kind of a foundation for a lot of what I've done. And so not very long after that, I was still working at Sac State, and I worked in an office where I wrote press releases, and I'd done some jobs. I did work as a technical writer for a while, and I worked as a television producer for a little while at Channel 3, and I did some stuff like that, but nothing, there was never a moment when I thought, this is what I want to do, you know? So, but I did kind of still want to write. And after I got out of grad school, I was going to be a freelance writer. And I don't know if you have any sense of what a crazy goal that is, especially in a place like Sacramento, because you're not in New York, you're not really in LA or any place where there are a lot of publications. So it was really hard. So for a while, I cleaned houses and mowed lawns so that I could be a freelance writer. And my father was kind of like, wow, you have a master's degree and you're cleaning houses and mowing lawns, you know? So, and it was about, maybe I did it and I had a catering business for a while. And so finally then, like I finished grad school in 1976. And in 1980, that spring, this friend of mine, a woman that taught at Sac State, who I had done some work for, she said, we hire, and she was in communication studies. She said, we hire former grad students and former grad students to teach if you have any interest. And I almost let the day go by to apply for it because I thought, I don't know, but I was sort of wanting to make myself do this thing. And so I applied, and I saw her later in the summer, and she said, yeah, we're going to hire you to teach, 2 public speaking classes. And I thought, oh my God, public speaking. I was just like, how could I ever do that? And so the first day of public speaking, I thought, oh my God. I said to the students, no matter how nervous you are, because it turns out that's all that people worry about in public speaking is just having to stand up and talk. So I said, you could not be as nervous as I am at all, so it kind of set the tone. But anyway, so I started teaching. This was 1980. and I taught there for 6 years, and then I went across the hall to journalism and said, hey, could I teach there? And they said yes. And so for 6 years I taught. I pretty much had a full load of classes the whole time, and then they and I really liked it. It was like, oh yeah, this is what you do, to teach, to be able to work with students. And so then I became the advisor of the school newspaper, the very same school newspaper that I had been scared to death to work for. I was now being the advisor of, so I did that. And then finally, they hired somebody full-time, and none of us adjuncts even got an interview. And so my office mate at the time was this super negative person. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to become her, like she didn't get an interview either. And she was like, really mad at the system. So I kind of thought, I got to get out of here. I got to go do something else. And because I think part of me, it's hard to believe, but part of me, I think I would have just stayed there forever because it was comfortable and, fine. But anyway, so this thing happened. So then that very summer, this was in probably January, and that very summer or spring, 3 community college journalism jobs opened in the state. And so I thought, okay, this is the thing. I have to apply for these, and one was at San Joaquin Delta in Stockton, and one was in Cupertino, which is a super expensive place to live, and one was at Sac City. And so today, the day I got the Sac City job, the Cupertino people, it was at De Anza College, they called and offered me that job too. And I mean, also, so I was really lucky. And I was super lucky because my parents were kind of old at the time. And so it was good that I could stay here, and that was 1986. And I taught there at Sac City. I taught journalism. I taught primarily journalism and English for about, altogether about 22 years. But in the middle of it, I became a dean of behavioral and social sciences. I thought, I'll be a dean. And it was that job that Frank Malloret had for a while, but in fact, I hired Frank Malloret. That's how long ago that was. But anyway, so I was a dean and I hated it. I just thought, oh my God, this is like the worst job in the world, because it's just like dealing with, somebody said, oh, well, you must hate it because of the meetings. I said, no, it's working with emotionally irresponsible grownups, like the faculty were just awful. I was like, are you kidding? You're going to complain about this job, And so I did it for a year, and then I went to my VPI and said, hey, I'll do it another year, but please let me just go back to teaching. And she was like, great, that's fine. So I did it for 2 years. I went back to teaching, and it was fine. And I kept trying to kind of reinvent myself all the time. And I was writing over the years. Like I had a column that I did for this sort of section of the Bee. And then I worked for News and Review for a long time. And so I was always writing, but nothing full time or anything like that. So then finally, I decided that I went back to being a dean again for a while. I did some interim jobs that they needed people for. And so then this job opened at Casumnas. And so I applied and I left City College and went to Casumnas, and I was the dean of humanities and social science for about 6 years. And it was fine. It was very weird to leave City College after all those years. And but I did, and it was fine, and I made a whole new kind of life there. But it was not City College; it was being in a different place, So, and Whitney Yamamura, who is at Folsom now, he was my VPI, so he was kind of my person. And but it was fine. It was super hard. It's the hardest job there is being a dean. Absolutely the hardest job there is. And so I did that, and then I retired. But right before I retired, I decided that this was my planning. I decided that I was gonna go back to school and get another master's degree. So I found this, what's called a low residency program in creative nonfiction, which is what I write. So I went the last year of working and my first year of retirement. See how I was gonna be really mindful of that I needed structure and whatnot. So then, but really, as it turns out, probably what I really should have done if I were really going to do it again is just waited until I retired, because really by the end of the first year of that program, I was kind of done with the writing part of it. I was more, because you make this big project, you know, but it was an amazing experience. Really, absolutely one of the best things I ever did. And I went twice a year, and we lived in the dorms, and I made lifelong friends, and we had a week in New York where we got to meet with agents and publishers, and it was just fabulous. And I'm still super connected to people there, my writing coaches from that program. And, you know, so it's been a really great thing. But when it ended, then I was going to be a writer again, just like when I was whatever age I was, you know, which again, it wasn't any easier to be a writer now than it was then. So that's not a great way to retire and engage in retirement, you know, because you're just kind of I get why I thought that at the time, but now I think that's crazy. But anyway, so as I say, I kept getting called back, asked back to work. Whitney asked me back, and I did some stuff for Thomas at ARC, and then I came back to this job, and then I was like, I'm gonna just apply for this job and unretire, you know. And so it was because I've worked with Albert forever, and so it was really amazing to get to work with him. But then when the pandemic came, and by that time Jody's a graphic designer, and she worked for UC Davis Health System for a long time. She used to have a business of her own, and then she worked for them. And it just became a really untenable job, as organizations sometimes are. And so she had quit that job during the time I was at Citi. And then a friend of hers offered her a contract job at Sac State, and she was very excited, and it was really good. And she was working for them. And then the pandemic came and she got laid off. So now she was kind of retired, even though she's only 60, she is retired. And so that was a completely different view of being retired than when I did it the first time, because now we were like, oh yeah, what are we going to do with our lives? You know, so it's an interesting time, you know, to be. But during the pandemic, I just all of a sudden, I think I felt the sort of preciousness of life, and that the amount of time that we spend in our lives working. And it's really hard work when you work with people, as you know, and it's really emotionally exhausting. And so it just seemed like, and I'm going to be 70 this year. So I just thought, yeah, I mean, not till September, but I thought, I think that's when you're supposed to do some more things. I think this is really it. I think I have kind of this hill to get over about this, and I want to own it. I don't want it to own me, you know, like how is it to be retired? Like, I don't want to say, well, I just couldn't do it, you know? I mean, I just need to explore it more than I explored it before, I think. So that's kind of where I am on this day.
Yeah, so you're this crossroad though of not doing the work, but really seeing what you're going to reinvent yourself as.
Yeah, trying to kind of figure out. Yeah, and it's good because I have a lot of options, you know, and that's what I've been trying to kind of do is like, oh yeah, what do I want? And you know, I wrote this thing in my blog recently about, well, maybe I would come, you know, probably I'll come back to work at some point. And that day, a friend of mine who's a president at Solano College texted me and said, hey, I got a job for you, you know, and I mean, it's not going there, it's just doing some consulting, but sure. And that seems good, you know, to kind of do some consulting. So you sort of stay in the system, you know, a little bit, but you know, it's just funny. So yeah, you know, it's interesting to see where it will go. And I don't really know. And that's not my approach to life much, is to not know, you know. Usually I like to want to know. I kind of came from a family where there was a lot of chaos growing up. And so my whole shtick was to try to control it, you know, and that's kind of my job in my family. And so now it's like, you know, so